U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken telling Israeli leaders today there is still a chance for peace if they can pave a path to a viable Palestinian state.
This is Blinken's fourth trip to the region since the Hamas ambush on October 7th. Shahrazani is a former Israeli diplomat and spokesperson at the Israeli consulate in New York. Welcome. So glad you could join us today.
Good morning, and so happy to join you both.
Good. So this latest mission will be quite different from the last fruitless attempts to stop the violence and finally free the hostages. What is your opinion of Blinken's attitude towards Israel's very aggressive military actions?
Well, I just want to thank you for actually mentioning the hostages, Betsy. It's so important that we remember exactly the situation of what's happening there. You know, the ICRC forgot the hostages, and even today it was published that when one of the members of the families of the hostages approached ICRC with a request to pass on medication to the hostages, the ICRC employee told that family member, well, you should first take care of Gazans. So I think the world was very quick to forget about the atrocities of these monsters who are holding 136 people, 136 innocent people who were snatched from their beds on a Saturday morning, including, you remember him? You remember Kfir Bibas, who was kidnapped at 9 months old, is now celebrating 1 year in captivity? I mean, when you think about the situation, it's untenable. And the fact that we still continue to talk about a Palestinian state, who in their right mind would give a state to what we're seeing here? Israel has given the Palestinians the opportunity to govern themselves in Gaza in 2005. In 2005, we evacuated thousands of people from Gaza. We dug the dead out of their graves to give Palestinians a chance to show themselves and the world and Israel that they're capable of managing a territory and exercise sovereignty. And the results are right before you on the screen. What we got was death and destruction, terrorist infrastructure. I mean, imagine this, the amount of building supplies that the international community urged Israel to allow into Gaza for them to build hospitals and schools, all of that money was used to build the most extensive terror network in the world. We are horribly and abominably impressed by all of the terrorist tunnels that we have discovered in the course of this operation. And this has been years and years and years in the making. Absolutely horrendous.
Well, and it's 95 days. Let's remind everyone, today is 95 days, including for that little tiny baby who was snatched at age 9 months. It's such a, show that picture. And Americans are, of course, concerned, unfortunately not as concerned as they should be, about the 8 American men who were included among these 136 hostages. They've started airing television ads here, but still there's just so little awareness of this.
Yep.
Please
and
tell us
so many
more.
and so many Americans who were butchered in Hamas's attack. I mean, when you think about the dozens of Americans and Israelis and Jews and even people who, you know, non-Jews who were simply affiliated with Israel. We had students who came to Israel from Africa to study agriculture and were tortured and killed by these monsters. And you know what we're hearing? We're hearing the horrible testimonies. We saw some of the images yesterday that came out of 4 teens who are at the hands of Hamas. You know, they are seen with blood on their faces, covered. God knows, unfortunately, we know what they are going through today. One of the hostages who was released from these monsters' captivity shared her testimony in the Israeli parliament in the Knesset. She testified that she herself witnessed one of those teen hostages as she came back from a restroom break and testified that she was brutally sexually assaulted by the Hamas terrorists. She couldn't even speak. Next to her, she saw Hamas terrorists torturing another young girl that they told her that she's an officer in the IDF. What these people are going through at the hands of these monsters, and then it's the framing of the struggle. You know, people talk about the Israeli-Palestinian issue as if we're back to 2014 or 2021. This is a battle of a radical fundamentalist Islamic movement who wishes to undermine our very social order in the West, not just Israel. This is a battle of civilization against barbarism. You know, Israel is just their first target. They wish to take out Israel, but their goal is to conquer the world. We know what the mindset of these people is. And we also know that Hamas itself, and it's important to remind our viewers, Hamas itself is not just a Palestinian movement. It's an Islamic movement. It's the Islamic resistance movement. And for me, I remember how the same movement moved from knife attacks in the 90s to suicide bombing attacks on buses, malls, and coffee shops, and later on now to killing en masse of thousands of Israelis. And guess what? The same suicide bombings we saw in Israel in the mid-90s arrived. And guess what? The same suicide bombings we saw in Israel in the mid-90s arrived in the West, in New York, in London, in Madrid, in Paris, a few years after, because we know that what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews, and what starts with the state of the Jews doesn't end in Israel.
I'm so glad.
So Israeli officials are reportedly set to tell the Secretary of State that unless, well, they won't allow displaced Palestinian individuals back into northern Gaza unless the Hamas terrorists agree to release more hostages. Is that the right strategy? It sounds like it's the right strategy to me. But what say you regarding the path forward to get more hostages back under those terms?
We know that every day that goes by, these hostages are at an immediate risk of death. Israel is not a death cult. It's a country bent on the love of life. Our enemies know it, and we know it. That has been our driving force. This is why when you visit Israel, you see the incredible booming economy, you see the agriculture, you see the technology, because we are a peace-loving people, and that has always been our secret sauce. We will do everything that we possibly can to release those hostages from the hands of these monsters. And if that entails making some concessions on the military side, which are short-term, in order to bring them back alive, we will. However, it's very important to also remember the long-term goal here. Israel will no longer live with Hamas on our southern border as a military or political power. We simply cannot. We've heard Ghazi Hamad and other Hamas officials claim post-October 7th that given the chance, they will commit this genocide again and again and again. And no viable state, no state that takes care of her citizens can allow such an entity to exist on our border, and we will not. And at the same time, we say this to Palestinians themselves, any Palestinian government that includes Hamas in some capacity will have no engagement with the state of Israel. Hamas is and forever will be a pariah entity and a stain on the soul of humanity and a cause for a great shame and embarrassment for anybody who cries out its name. And unfortunately, we've seen demonstrations right here in the US of people who are chanting their support for Hamas. Really? Really? You support an organization that decapitated babies? That put Jewish babies in the ovens? More than it says about you, what kind of risk do you pose to the United States of America if this is your set of values?
I am so glad you have stated this so clearly. This is a battle between good and evil. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. May we all have better days soon, and thank you very much.
And we'll pray for the hostages.